Section 8 of Selected Works of E. Boyd Smith. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Story of Our Country, Part 2, by E. Boyd Smith. Chapter 11. Lexington, April 19th, 1775. In Massachusetts it seemed as if war must come. The different towns enrolled their militia and prepared for the conflict. Powder and guns were gathered, and in Concord a depot was established. The British general decided to seize these supplies by the surprise of a night march. He set his troops in motion, but the patriotic citizens on the watch signaled by lanterns from the North Church tower and gave the warning to Paul Revere, who, on the Charlestown town shore, was on the lookout. He mounted his horse and rode through the night, giving the alarm. Once he was captured by the enemy, but released, he went on again, knocking at doors, shouting that the soldiers were coming. Alarm guns were fired, and the drums beat, calling out the militia to fight for liberty. As the last stars of night were disappearing, and the morning light beginning to cast shadows across the village green of Lexington, the British arrived, to discover the militiamen, some 60 or 70, drawn up in two lines. The English leader, Pitcairn, riding in front, cried out, "Disperse, ye villains, ye rebels!" The countrymen stood firm, witnesses against aggression. Pitcairn, discharging his pistol, cried, "Fire!" A deadly volley from the soldiers followed, and 7 of the men of Lexington fell dead, martyrs whose blood called up armies. The English pushed on to Concord, where the news had gone before. Here they were resisted and forced to turn back. And now, along the way, from behind the trees and stone walls, in Indian fashion, the countrymen fought them, driving them with heavy loss, defeated, back to Boston. The War of the Revolution had begun. From every quarter the militia gathered rapidly. Putnam, at Pomfret, Connecticut, jumped on his horse, rode 100 miles in 18 hours to Cambridge, opposite Boston, his militia companies following as fast as they could, just in time to meet John Stark of New Hampshire, who led his in. By noon of the day after the fight, New Haven turned out its volunteers, who, led by Arnold, set out for Cambridge, picking up recruits along the way. And so from every hill and valley in New England on they came, till shortly the English general found himself besieged in Boston by an American army of some 16,000 men. This surprising result came about from the way the people had lived. They were all accustomed to the use of firearms, for hunting or fighting the Indians or French. Every man had his musket and powder flask. They grew up practically soldiers, and thus formed a firm material for an effective militia. But for this universal use of firearms, it is doubtful if the colonies could have won their independence. Everywhere now they rose in arms to support Massachusetts, and fight for what they claimed was their liberty. Joseph Warren of Boston expressed their sentiment when he said, "It is the united voice of America to preserve their freedom, or lose their lives in defense of it. America must and will be free." Chapter 12. Washington crossing the Delaware, December 25th, 1776. Once the war was started, the Americans struck with vigor. In May, Ethan Allen and Seth Warner led the men from the Green Mountains of Vermont and the Connecticut Valley against the forts of Ticonderoga and Crown Point, which they took. This was to prevent the British coming down from Canada. From here they brought much-needed cannon for the siege of Boston. At the same time, the Second Continental Congress met at Philadelphia and appointed Washington to take charge of the army of patriots, now called the Continental Army. He started soon for Cambridge, for Boston was the seat of the fighting. Meanwhile, the Americans fortified themselves by breastworks on Bunker Hill, Charleston, just opposite Boston. Here the British, now 10,000 strong, attacked them. Twice they charged against the American lines, only to be driven back with great loss. Their third attack was successful, for the Americans were now short of powder and had to give up the hill. But this battle, though a defeat, gave them renewed courage, for they here learned that they could successfully face regular soldiers. Washington soon after arrived and took command. He succeeded in compelling the British to leave Boston, and then marched to New York, where other British armies had arrived. On July 4th of this year, 1776, Congress issued our Declaration of Independence, thus finally breaking away from England forever. This is the day we celebrate. Through this year Washington boldly fought the English, but they were too strong, and he was compelled to fall back. During the winter, just after he had retreated across the Delaware River, he saw a chance to surprise the enemy. In the dead of a bitter cold night, Christmas night, With great difficulty he crossed the river, through snow and floating ice, and in the morning pounced upon Trenton, New Jersey, then held by a large body of Hessian troops. These were German soldiers hired by the English. His attack was so successful that he captured them all, 1,000 men. Then he vigorously kept up the attack on Princeton, winning another victory. These successes greatly encouraged the Americans. Now the fighting, through 1777, became more severe. The English made great efforts to conquer, and the Americans a determined resistance. Washington never missed a chance for attacking, but still the enemy was too strong. Though one English army, coming down from Canada, under Burgoyne, was surrounded and captured. Through all the long, hard fighting, Washington labored under great difficulties. Congress could not always give him the money to pay his troops, and these troops were always coming and going. Each colony, jealous of its rights, enlisted its men in its own way. So that thus he really had 13 different armies to make into one. Each carried its own banner, even though the Stars and Stripes, our flag, had been designed. The winter of 1777, passed at Valley Forge, was one of great hardship and suffering. The men were hungry, cold, and often barefoot, and only the great character of Washington kept them together. Franklin had gone to France for help, and now, just when most needed, France not only sent money and arms, but joined the Americans, and sent soldiers and ships, 1778. Before this, a gallant volunteer, Lafayette, had come, inspired by our brave fight for liberty. Chapter 13. Yorktown Victory, 1781. The war dragged on and spread to wider and wider boundaries. The Tories, those colonists who did not wish to be Americans, incited the Indians to take the warpath, and there were massacres of innocent people along the frontiers. Rogers Clark boldly and successfully waged war on this enemy in the West. And far away on the sea, Paul Jones, with the help of the French, fitted out his ship, the Bon Homme Richard, and attacked and captured the English warship Serapis, his own ship sinking after the battle. There were very gloomy moments in this long war, when many became discouraged, but Washington, with stout heart, still held his army together and fought on, overcoming every obstacle. Congress could not raise money, troops mutinied, and treachery, and even treason, raised its head. The British, failing to beat Washington, overran the Southern States. Then, when things were at their blackest, there came a change. General Greene, whom Washington had sent south, successfully harassed and fought the enemy. Marion and Sumter, with their bands of frontiersmen, won important victories, and the English were forced to retreat. Washington, keenly watching for the right occasion, now, by a rapid and skillful march, led his troops, with the French army of Rochambeau, to the north of Virginia, before the British army of New York could interfere. Here, with the help of the French fleet, under De Grasse, he penned the army of Cornwallis into Yorktown. He at once began the siege of the town, battering down its defenses with his cannon. At last, when all was ready, the Americans and French attacked together. The success was complete. Cornwallis surrendered his army of over 7,000 men, who, on the following day, marched out between the American and French armies drawn up, and laid down their arms, October 19, 1781. Victory had come to great Washington at last, after 6 years of fighting, for the war was won. Though the treaty of peace with England was not signed till April 19, 1783. Precisely 8 years from the day on which was shed that first blood at Lexington, a new nation, recognized by all, came into existence. Now another great difficulty presented itself: how to hold these colonies together and form one country. A federal convention was held at Philadelphia, which drew up our Constitution, 1787, setting forth our form of government. The different colonies finally accepted it, and today it is still the ruling law of our land. Washington was unanimously elected as our first president, the President of the United States. We can never be grateful enough for having had the good fortune to have had this really great and good man to lead us in war, and then in peace. He truly and justly has been called the father of his country. As one of his generals, Henry Lee, said of him, he was "first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his fellow citizens." Chapter 14. Lewis and Clark Expedition, 1805. France, by right of discovery, had claimed a vast territory back of the English colonies, reaching west to the Mississippi and beyond to the Pacific. England now, by conquest, in turn claimed this. The Americans in their great war sought to protect themselves by taking over much of this land. Rogers Clark, in his victories over the Tories and Indians, gained control of a great territory west of the Alleghanies and north of the Ohio. More to the south, the famous hunter, Daniel Boone, led a band of settlers into Kentucky, and after fierce battles with the Indians, established a settlement. Others followed him fast. When France lost her colonies to England, she gave Louisiana, La Salle's work, to Spain, who held it for 30 years, claiming the right to control the trade of the Mississippi River, seriously annoying our rapidly developing western settlements, which wished to float their goods down to the Gulf. But in 1800, Napoleon again took over Louisiana for the French, which he finally sold to the Americans in 1803. Thomas Jefferson, then our president, saw the value of the land to us and made the purchase. And on December 20th, the French flag descended from the staff in the square of New Orleans, and the American flag went up to stay. This cession of Louisiana gave us an immense territory, of unknown extent, beyond the Mississippi, what is now our Great West. President Jefferson at once began to have this territory explored. He sent out an expedition headed by Captains Lewis and Clark, who made one of the greatest exploring trips ever known, and of far-reaching consequences. They set out in the spring of 1805, and with boats sailed and rowed up the Missouri River. As the stream became narrower, they advanced in canoes, using great skill in their dealings with the Indians, to avoid fighting. On the way they took with them an Indian woman, Sacagawea, who had been captured as a child from her home in the Rocky Mountains. She proved of great help as an interpreter. At the Shoshone village, on their way, where Lewis and Clark were holding council with the chief, in his tent, she was called in to talk for them. She recognized in the person of the chief, Cameawat, her brother. She ran and embraced him, throwing over him her blanket and weeping profusely. The chief was himself much moved to thus again meet his long-lost sister. The Shoshones now gave to the party of explorers food and help. Leaving their canoes, with Indian guides, they struggled on foot over the Rocky Mountains, through snow and cold, suffering great hardships. Their food gave out, and they were forced to eat their horses. Still they pushed on, and at last reached the Pacific. Here they passed a hard winter, short of food and clothing. Then they started back, reaching St. Louis in September, 1806. Their great journey of 4,000 miles, which had taken 28 months, was successfully ended. They had paved the way for the opening of the Great West. Meanwhile, our country had been developing fast. On the seas our merchant ships were carrying our goods abroad. In the waters of Europe and the Mediterranean Sea, the Barbary pirates seized our vessels and demanded tribute of us. We sent our ships to fight them, under Commodore Preble, and began to train our small navy to defend ourselves. One of our frigates, the Philadelphia, unfortunately struck a reef and was captured. Decatur, a gallant young lieutenant, in a small vessel, attacked the pirates holding the ship, beat them off, and set fire to the Philadelphia, which he could not save. After more fighting, where our soldiers and sailors captured a town, the pirates decided to leave us alone for a while. We had shown that we could strike back. Chapter 15. Battle of Lake Erie, 1813. Now our country grew very rapidly, both in prosperity and in extent. At the close of the Revolution, Congress had given large tracts of land to soldiers, and a great movement towards the West set in. Here, as before, they met the Indians, who furiously resisted the invasion of their lands, and bitter, bloody wars followed. Harrison won a great victory over them at Tippecanoe, but these Indian wars were everywhere, north and south, and did not end until the Indians, much later, had been driven across the Mississippi. Our merchant fleet grew to be extensive. In 1807, Fulton first successfully applied steam to our river vessels on the Hudson. This gradually caused a real revolution in shipbuilding. Just then England and France began warring again, and both preyed on our merchant ships. To make matters worse, England arrogantly claimed the right to take sailors from our ships, giving the excuse that they were deserters from her navy. She carried on this outrage so long that we were at last forced to go to war, 1812. On the sea our ships were gloriously successful, defeating and capturing the British frigates at almost every meeting. On land, where our army was small and untrained, we were not so happy. In the struggle for supremacy of the Great Lakes, Perry built a fleet of ships at Erie. He floated it across the bar into Lake Erie with flats, called camels, after removing the guns. As soon as he found the English fleet, he attacked it, leading with the Lawrence, and fought against great odds for over an hour, inflicting serious damage on the enemy until, when the Lawrence had become useless for further fighting, he took his flag, hearing the last words of Captain Lawrence, "Don't give up the ship," and under fire had himself rowed to the Niagara, just then slowly coming into action. With the Niagara and the rest of his fleet he gallantly led the attack again, and this time victory was his, and the English struck and surrendered. When the battle was won, Perry wrote with a pencil, on the back of an old letter, resting it on his navy hat, the famous dispatch to General Harrison, "We have met the enemy, and they are ours. 2 ships, 2 brigs, 1 schooner, 1 sloop." This victory decided the campaign in the Northwest, giving to the Americans control of the lakes and safety on the land adjoining. The fighting moved away from this region, except where the Indians, under Tecumseh, fighting with the English, met General Harrison at the Battle of the Thames, where they were beaten and Tecumseh killed. In Alabama, the Creek Indians also rose and massacred right and left until Andrew Jackson met and defeated them at Tallapoosa. This same General Jackson, later one of our presidents, won a great victory over the English at New Orleans. They came to attack him with a veteran army of 12,000 men. Behind a line of cotton bales, Jackson's Rangers and riflemen stood fast, and as the British came on, defeated them with great slaughter. In less than half an hour the English army was in flight, thoroughly defeated. This ended the War of 1812. Never after did the English molest our sailors. Now, here again, in 1815, we hear of that gallant Lieutenant Decatur, who so daringly attacked the Barbary pirates. He sailed into the harbor of Algiers, as that country had declared war on us, and compelled their chiefs to come on board his ships and make peace. And now American commerce was free to sail safely wherever it would. Chapter 16. Clipper Ships and Whalers, 1846. Once again at peace, our country forged ahead. An endless flood of settlers steadily poured westward, till, by 1830, all the territory east of the Mississippi was pretty well occupied. Fulton's invention of the steamboat immediately produced important results. On all our great lakes and rivers steamboats now carried settlers and goods. For 2,000 miles the great Mississippi, the river of De Soto and La Salle, was busy with this traffic. And soon the railroads, just perfected by Stephenson in England, spread rapidly up and down and across the country. In 1837 Morse sent us the telegraph. With the development of the telegraph, the steamboat, and the railway, America changed from an overgrown type of colonial life to that of a nation. Its growth in 10 years, from 1830 to 1840, was remarkable, from 13 million to 17 million in population. In 1846 Elias Howe gave us the sewing machine, a most useful and valuable invention. We soon became a great maritime people. Our ships carried our flag everywhere. We crossed the Atlantic to England with the first steamship, the Savannah, in 1819. Our fast clipper ships reached out for the trade of the Far East and brought from China and India their products, teas, spices, silk, etc., exchanging for them our goods. And our coasts were busy with a mighty ship trade, building and sailing. New England, once so poor, grew rich and prosperous. Emigrants from the Old World flocked to our shores, the land of promise, where everyone had an equal chance. Our whalers were busy. In 1846 New Bedford sent out 735 ships. They chased the whales from the icy seas of Greenland to the South Seas. In those days in our lamps we burned whale oil, sperm oil. Later, from 1853, as petroleum was discovered in our country, we changed to this, what we call kerosene, and now it has wholly taken the place of the whale oil, and the whale fleet has become a memory of the past. While we thus reached out on the seas, at the same time we were ever advancing westward. Fremont had explored across the country to California, which had been settled by the Spaniards. The Americans feared that England would seize this country and hastened to get in first. In Texas, settlers steadily gaining a foothold kept crowding south and west into Mexican territory. This brought on hostilities, and in 1846 we went to war with Mexico. The war was short, and as we were the stronger, we won. At the peace, California was ceded to us. Gold was discovered in California in 1848, and at once a wild rush set in, much as in the old days of the Spaniards of De Soto's time. In 1849 as many as 80,000 men reached that country, coming from all lands. Half, perhaps, crossed the Great Plains through the Indians. Others by sea in our fast clipper ships went around Cape Horn, the way Magellan had discovered in 1519. Sailors on reaching San Francisco deserted their ships, soldiers deserted wholesale. Everybody was wild to get rich quick, and in a few years, from a small village San Francisco became a large city, and California in time a great state. Thus, by one means and another, our country has developed and become settled. Chapter 17. Gettysburg, July 3, 1863. As civilization advances, wrong must give way and right must triumph. A great wrong had been implanted in our country as far back as 1620, when the institution of slavery was introduced by the bringing of African negroes to Virginia. Slavery had always been, and only as the world grew more and more civilized was it given up, till at last only in our country did it still exist. In the Northern States, the climate and the habits of the people gradually caused its decline, making it easier for them to see the great moral wrong. In the South, where cotton was the great crop, the planters grew into the habit of making slaves do all the work, and thus self-interest blinded them to the injustice of the system. Though some of their leaders, Washington and especially Jefferson, early saw how evil it was and wished to end it. In the early days, the old colonies had always been jealous of their local independence. We have seen how difficult it was to form a real union. Now this feeling still continued, under the name of States' Rights, and the two sections, North and South, instead of growing together, fell apart, weakening the spirit of the Union. This slave system bred insolence in the South, while the energetic North rapidly increased in prosperity and population. As the people of the North now looked on slavery as a blot on the national honor, since we alone kept it up, when new States were formed they tried to prohibit its advance, while the people of the South jealously struggled to continue the institution. The result was an unavoidable clash, ending in a great civil war which lasted for 4 years, from 1861 to 1865. On the sea took place a remarkable battle, of a new and unheard-of type. An iron-covered ram, the Merrimac, successfully began to destroy the government warships, then of wood, when suddenly the Monitor, a new invention, all of iron, with a revolving turret, appeared and beat her off after a furious duel. This revolutionized the building of warships, and wooden construction gave place to iron and steel. The revolving turret still remains today. On land a long series of skirmishes and battles was bitterly fought, victory alternating from one side to the other, till, in 1863, the turning point was reached at Gettysburg, where, after a 3 days' battle, the army of the Southern States was completely defeated. Here, though beaten, the Southern troops earned a brilliant record for bravery in Pickett's famous charge. He led his gallant men across an exposed field under a galling fire of cannon and musketry, at a frightful cost, straight up and into the Union lines, but only to be driven back by equally brave men. They were all Americans. From this turning point the power of the national government prevailed, and in time the war was won. Our great President, Abraham Lincoln, had determined to preserve the Union, at any cost, and now, after 4 years of struggle, he had succeeded, and since then we stand united as one nation. This great war decided the question of slavery. The President, by proclamation, decreed that it should be forever ended, and the black man was freed. The whole country paid a terrible price for the wrong it had inherited from our forefathers, but as a nation we gained by sacrifice, and now at last our land became the land of liberty for all. Chapter 18. Railroad across the Plains, 1869. After the Civil War, when the great armies melted back into civilization, there was a steady advance of adventurous spirits, former soldiers, to the new West beyond the Mississippi. And settlements sprang up in that wide land acquired by Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase, and explored, as we have seen, by Lewis and Clark, and later Fremont. Travel was by bull team, the prairie schooners, great covered wagons. In the trail of the settlers followed the stagecoach, and then the picturesque Pony Express. Dashing horsemen, by relays, carried the mail from St. Joseph, Missouri, to Sacramento, California, in from 8 to 10 days. The rider, with his mail bag, would dash across the plains. Arriving at a settlement, he would leap to the saddle of a horse already waiting, and off again, risking, and sometimes losing, his life by Indian attack. As early as 1835, Asa Whitney had recommended the building of a railway across the plains as a short cut to the trade of the Far East, that East which had lured the first explorers who had reached our country. General Sherman, while in military command in San Francisco, in 1849, sent out two lieutenants to find a way for this through the Sierra Mountains. Lieutenant Warner was killed by the Indians, for our fighting with the red men was not yet ended. Now, at the close of the war, the government encouraged railroad building by liberal grants of money for work achieved. From the extreme west and from the east the railroad construction began in 1865. The Union Pacific, beginning at Omaha, Nebraska, rapidly pushed west, at one time with an army of 25,000 men and 6,000 teams laying in a single day, at times, 10 miles of tracks. This work was done only by overcoming great obstacles, among which were the frequent attacks of the Indians, who furiously resisted this new invasion of their hunting grounds. They would pounce down upon the advanced workmen, and kill and destroy, till at last it became necessary to protect the work with soldiers. But the white man was in earnest, and could not be stopped. At this time countless herds of buffalo roamed the plains. The famous Buffalo Bill, of picturesque memory, once a pony express rider, now served as scout and meat supplier, killing buffalo for the great work army. This is how he got his name. From the west, with much the same difficulties, the Central Pacific pushed east. At last the two lines met at Promontory Point, Utah, May 9, 1869, and the last rails were laid. The great work was done. From the Atlantic to the Pacific our peoples were joined together by the railroad. The event was celebrated by ringing of bells throughout the land. The results to us of the opening of the railroad were almost as important as the discovery of Columbus or the coming of the Pilgrims. It gave to us a new world, the Great West, opening up a territory more than twice as big as that east of the Mississippi. Chapter 19. The Great West. Other railroads soon followed this first enterprise, and along their way a rapid development set in. With our own people came countless emigrants from other lands to this fair land of hope and plenty. And within 25 years of the building of the railroad 15,000,000 people were living between the Missouri and the Pacific. Not without trouble, for Indian uprisings were frequent. For nearly 300 years the white man and the red man fought for the land, our country. The Indian at last had to give way. Now, in this his last stronghold, where he roamed as a hunter, the buffalo is hardly more than a memory, and the Indian a curiosity. The West, as the early settlers knew it, is now gone. That great land, sometimes known as the American desert, is filled with homes and thriving towns. Where was once only the wild grass are now wheat fields, orchards, meadows, and flower gardens. The dry plains, furrowed only by the tracks of thousands of wild buffalo and Indian trails, are now crossed in every direction by steel rails. The smoke of busy industries now rise where not long ago rose the signal fires of the savage, which called the tribe to the attack on the settler's wagon train. The fate of that long dream of the trade with the Far East is curious. It soon became of little importance, for, with the rapid settling of the country, 95%, almost all of the revenue of the railroads comes from what is called local business, that is the trade with the West, carrying its products to the Eastern States. And yet the railroad originally was thought of for the traffic of the Orient. Now in our day this great West practically feeds the nation. From here comes our wheat, our flour, and our meat. Here are raised great flocks of sheep and herds of cattle. Here is the picturesque cowboy, who with his fellows drove great droves of beef from Mexico and the south of our western lands for 3,000 miles in a 6 months' drive, through drought perhaps, and swimming such rivers as were met in the way, up to the north to meet the railroads. Who then shipped by rail these cattle to the great stockyards of Chicago, to be slaughtered, prepared, and shipped in every direction throughout the country to feed the East, now the home of factories, where everything else needed for our comfort is made. And now our whole country, settled from the Atlantic to the Pacific, under a form of government which gives everyone a chance to do his part and reap his reward, grows steadily more prosperous and powerful, now not only a union, but a nation. Chapter 20. Return of our troops from the Great War, 1919. We have had a good share in giving to the world useful inventions, such as the steamboat, the sewing machine, the telegraph, and iron ship, already mentioned. We gave also the telephone and the phonograph, with many other valuable ideas. the principle of the machine gun, so much used in war, and the flying machine, and we mustn't forget the ubiquitous and useful Ford car. Not long ago we aided Cuba in gaining her freedom from a Spanish rule she disliked, though we had to send our ships and soldiers to do it. So ended Spanish dominion in America after 400 years. Our persevering Arctic explorer, Perry, at last carried our flag first to the North Pole. We built the Panama Canal, connecting the eastern waters with the Pacific. To our shores have come unnumbered hosts of emigrants from the old worlds. They have been absorbed and made into Americans. Their children, born here, will be as good Americans as any. So that now our citizens are being made up from all peoples. Everything which goes into our great melting pot becomes American. History is always in the making. In the midst of peace, in 1914, a great nation of Europe, Germany, reverted back to savagery, and ran amok, murdering and destroying. And gradually nearly all the rest of the more civilized world was drawn in to stop this mad dog. Even we at last had to join in the fight. And willingly we went forth to help heroic France in her struggle for life. We had not forgotten Lafayette, and that France which helped us to gain our independence. Splendidly our whole country arose to the effort. Red Cross societies were formed everywhere throughout the land, and women worked to make bandages for the wounded soldiers. Everybody helped by raising more food or loaning money to the government. The whole movement was altruistic and noble, service for humanity. Our young men were enrolled as soldiers, and soon we landed over 2,000,000 in France, who gallantly went into battle, fighting side by side with England, once our mother, then our enemy, and now our gallant ally. And by our help the brutal enemy was beaten, and peace given to a suffering world. Many of our brave dead lie buried in France, but they did not die in vain. Among them, strange to say, were a number of Indians, fighting side by side with the white man. The last of the red men died like warriors, as of old. Our troops are home with us again. The veterans of Gettysburg saluted their triumphant grandsons, and that nightmare of war is past. Our faces again are turned towards the future. Thus ends the story of our country, so far, 1920. Now, all these people, through this long story, from away back in the beginning, were flesh and blood just like us. They worked, slept, loved, and were sick, even suffered from toothache, just as we do. They were our forefathers, we are blood relations to them. If it hadn't been for them and what they did, we should not be here today. Let us not forget, to us the creed of ancestor worship is fitting. Let us each and all, proud of our great past, strive to be equal to it, and take for our motto, Noblesse oblige. Long live the United States of America. End of the story of our country. End of selected works by E. Boyd Smith. Recorded by Barry Eads.